Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming today. For more than 20 years now, we've had British workers coming second, undercut by migrant labour, which drives down wages and our people's quality of life. According to the government's own figures, millions of low-skilled migrants have been brought into this country and they've cost us hundreds of billions of pounds. Not to mention the pressure that's been put on GP surgeries, on our schools, housing, on the roads. Well, under a reform government, those days are going to come to an end. It's all going to change. Because a reform government will do what frankly should have been done a very long time ago by previous Labour and Conservative governments. We're going to make it easier for businesses to employ British workers. We're going to make it easier to employ British workers than to employ migrant workers for the first time. Under reform, it will be British workers first, migrant workers second. Along with our wider migration policies, as set out by Nigel and Zia last year, the tax reform that I'm announcing today will end the cheap migrant labour racket once and for all. The experiment of letting millions of people into the country, predominantly low-wage migrants, as millions of Brits languish on benefits, has been nothing short of a catastrophe. 1 in 6 working-age British people are now on out-of-work benefits. 7 million people. In the last 6 years, that is up by 3 million. And also in that time, we've let in 5 million migrants, many doing jobs that the Brits should be doing. And as a result, what do we have? We've got an exploding benefits bill. Towns and cities are now blighted by mass worklessness. Children are growing up in households where their parents don't work and not in the dignity and security of work. This combination of unskilled migration and a growing number of Brits on benefits has been a fiscal, a social, and a cultural disaster. Reform are going to end it. As Nigel and Zia set out last year, we won't be renewing the visas of millions of low-wage migrants, and many not working at all. We'll be scrapping indefinite leave to remain. Millions will leave. And we'll be shifting millions of Brits off welfare and back into those freed-up jobs. This reform and fundamental reforms to our welfare system will finally help us to achieve this goal. Today, I can announce 2 big changes that will help us to ensure this happens. Step 1, we are going to scrap Rachel Reeves's disastrous rise in the rate of employers' national insurance. The jobs tax is in large part why our economy has ground to a halt. Since its introduction, unemployment has risen by nearly 200,000. And we've got near record youth unemployment. I can't tell you how many businesses that I have spoken to across the country, large and small, that are despairing right now about this job-destroying, growth-sapping act of self-harm that has destroyed economic opportunities in this country. So I can commit today that under a reform government, we will scrap Labour's rise in employers' national insurance. But we are going to do it for British workers only. It is high time that the British government put the interests of British workers first and migrant labour second, rather than has been done for decades now, which is the other way around. Successive Labour and Conservative Chancellors of the Exchequer. This is how the Treasury has operated for most of my adult lifetime. Instead of reforming our broken economy, those chancellors artificially inflated it with foreign labour to juice up the GDP figures that bore no connection to the experiences of working Brits. Well, a reform Treasury is going to do things very, very differently. Across the first term of a reform government, this tax cut for British workers will be funded by the introduction of the Employers' Migrant Labour Levy, and by getting Brits off welfare and back into work. We're going to scrap the immigration skills charge, which is levied on just 1 in 8 foreign workers in Britain today. And we're going to replace it with a graduated levy on employers, an annual fee for each foreign worker they employ. This new tax is going to particularly hit cheap foreign labour as their visas begin to run out, and incentivise the businesses that employ them to replace them quickly, as soon as possible, with Brits who are currently languishing on benefits. Now, the logic is very simple. Right now, say that you are running a care home or a distribution centre, and there's a national living wage vacancy. It makes no difference to you whether you take on somebody who is a British citizen or you hire a foreign worker. But as I said earlier, it makes a huge difference to our country. If the migrant is hired, the taxman collects £7,000 in taxes, but ends up paying the British candidate, but not hired, around £8,000 at least on universal credit. If the British worker is hired instead, the £7,000 in tax will still be paid, but this time to a Brit, but the £8,000 in benefits would be saved. The consecutive Conservative and Labour Chancellors of the Exchequer have enabled this system for so long. This scam on the British taxpayer and on British workers is frankly a scandal. It's been a straightforward redistribution from the working people of Britain and the good British businesses that set out to employ British workers to those businesses that are dependent on cheap foreign labour. And again, this isn't just about tax and benefits. Think about the kids who've been growing up in workless households, the wages of working class Brits that have been driven down as a result. Our migrant labour levy will do what smart taxes do. It's what economists call internalising the externalities. Under reform, because of this levy, businesses will have to take responsibility for the costs and benefits their hiring decisions have on everyone else. That's why the levy will be extremely minor for very highly skilled foreign national workers. Think top scientists, AI researchers, people working in financial services, investors coming into the country. But it will clamp down hard, very hard, on employers who are dependent on cheap foreign labour. Employers who are choosing to employ migrant workers over Brits, who are undercutting the wages of British workers. And every penny of the levy will go towards cutting employment taxes for businesses on British workers. Every penny of the levy will go to cutting employment taxes for businesses on British workers. So how exactly is it going to work? We may be 3 years out from election. It might be sooner, but it might be 3 years. So it would be irresponsible to set out the full and final tapered levy today. It's only right that we take the time to consult with businesses and industries. But given the fundamental change to the economy that we're proposing, I want to put businesses on notice now as to what is going to come. Be under no illusions. The era of mass migration is going to come to an end under reform. But for illustrative purposes, Suppose it was set at around £3,750 for a full-time worker on the national living wage, and it tapered down to £1,500 for someone earning around £50,000 and £500 for someone earning around £100,000. There are around 3.6 million non-EU workers in Britain. Most earn the medium income or less. The weighted average levy on them would be around £2,900. That means the levy will raise £10 billion from non-EU migrants on PAYE alone. Include contractors and the self-employed, and it would raise £11.2 billion from this group alone. Scrapping Rachel Reeves's jobs tax for British workers would cost the exact same amount. So even without including migrant workers with EU settled status, and they would be included in the levy and a source of several billions extra in revenue, the migrant labour levy can fund this big tax cut for British workers. Now, of course, this policy will in no way delay or impede the exit from Britain of migrants that we don't need. The levy is in part designed to help businesses to transition to the new world where cheap foreign labour won't be on tap under reform, as we won't be renewing the visas of millions of low-skilled migrants. So yes, the tax base for this levy will rapidly shrink as reforms migration policies come into place and have rapid effect. But the revenue gains from the levy will not. Why? Because if a low-wage migrant leaves, even one paying the levy, and a British worker takes the job from receiving universal credit, the Exchequer will gain nearly £10,000 a year. As long as just 4 in 10 of the vacated roles go to Britons coming off welfare, less than half, the package will continue to more than pay for itself. That's just 175,000 extra Brits coming off universal credit every year. Just a 21% increase, which is reasonable to think that the levy, alongside the welfare reforms that we've already set out and will be working on in the months to come, will lead to, especially given that there are now more than 7 million Brits on out-of-work welfare. So Nigel Farage and I are very confident that this can and will be done. We're setting out our intentions today so businesses have due notice of what is going to happen in a reform government. The era of businesses getting rich by undercutting British workers' wages is going to end. The combination of migration, welfare, and tax reforms will be the biggest change to our economy this century. But it's a change that, frankly, is long overdue. Change in the interests of our people, of our economy, of our society. Lower taxes for British businesses who are doing the right thing and employing British workers. Lower taxes for British workers. More Brits in work. Fewer Brits on welfare. That is the Britain that reform intends to build. Thank you very much. Well, now I'm going to take some questions from the press, and the first one I've got is from Joe Pike of the BBC. Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Mr. Jenrick. Thank you for the speech. Joe Pike, BBC News. Why the taper with this policy? Surely you want to help British workers get the best high-paid jobs, not merely focus the policy on those less paid. And also, what's your message to critics who question why you're announcing a policy but saying you won't give the full details until close to the election?
Well, firstly, we've given a lot of detail today, and we're publishing a document alongside this. We are very confident that on the basis of the detailed modelling that we've done, that the levy that we will be introducing more than pays for reversing Rachel Reeves's disastrous jobs tax for British workers. I don't think it would be responsible for us to give the final graduated levy today. That is normal. That is the way that other oppositions have behaved in the past. If you think back to when Labour in opposition in the 1990s announced the national living wage, a similarly big change to the way in which the economy would operate. They didn't announce the precise level at which the minimum wage was going to be set before the general election. They did so knowing the state of the economy at the time that they did it. But I've given you today an indication of where it would be set. Were we setting it right now? I've said that if you were a worker on the living wage, at the bottom end of the income spectrum, then it would be around £3,750. So to answer your other question, the reason that we're doing this is because we want to make it very difficult for employers to continue to rely on this easy lever of cheap foreign labour. If you run a care home or a distribution centre, if you're one of the thousands of people in my constituency who work in jobs like that, then those employers, frankly, should be going out into the labour market and employing Brits. And if that means paying those people a little bit more, then they should do that, because they have relied for far too long on an easy lever of foreign labour, and that is going to come to an end once and for all. We don't want this to penalise the most skilled people, the very highly skilled people who come into this country, top scientists and investors. We want Britain to continue to attract, on a meritocratic basis, the very best people. But look, beyond no doubt, in a reform government, the Treasury is going to behave differently to the way it has in the past. Previous chancellors have just juiced up the GDP numbers by relying on foreign labour to come into the country. And that has made the lives of British people worse. Their wages have been undercut, and it has meant that millions, particularly at the lower end of the spectrum, have been languishing on welfare. That comes to an end, and this policy does that. Thank you very much. I've got Keith Bays now from GB News. Oh, sorry. I've got Jasmine, from ITV News. Jasmine.
Hi, Jasmine Cameron-Chaleshi, ITV News. Migrant workers are heavily relied upon across the social care, hospitality and manufacturing sectors. Have you consulted with these sectors, met with businesses to better understand the impact of some of these changes? And secondly, over the weekend, the party said that it would ban foreign nationals from living in social housing. What's your response to housing charities like Shelter, who say the policy is morally wrong and it won't actually address the decades-long failure to build enough affordable social homes? Thank you. Well,
let me answer your first question, your second question first. Look, it is completely wrong that people who are new arrivals, recent arrivals to our country, are getting access to social housing. Social housing should be for British citizens. How can you possibly justify someone who is not a British citizen getting access to a council house when there is a military veteran sleeping rough on the streets, where there is a young mum with kids who is a Brit living in temporary accommodation, where there's a British victim of domestic abuse unable to escape their abuser or living in a hostel and not getting access to that housing? That is wrong, and only reform has the courage to say so and speak up for British people and get this done. On your first point, yes, we have spoken to employers. And let me be very clear. If you look at the care sector, 81% of people who work in social care are British citizens. So if you run a care home and the vast majority of your workers are British citizens, then what I'm announcing today will be extremely welcome. It will be a big tax cut. It will be the reversal of Rachel Reeves's disastrous increase in employers' national insurance. But if you run a business that is heavily reliant on foreign workers, then you are going to have to change your business model. Yes, absolutely. Because we're not going to be renewing the visas of those individuals because they won't meet the salary threshold. We will be abolishing ILR, and this new levy will force you to confront those decisions as soon as reform comes into power. And that will be a good thing for everybody concerned. I've got Tony Diver now from The Telegraph.
Thank you, Mr. Jenrick. Tony Diver from The Telegraph. Presumably the impact of your policy is that you almost immediately end up with a huge number of unemployed foreign nationals in the UK who, under your policy, also don't have any recourse to benefits or to social housing. So what would a reform government plan to do with these people, or are you hoping people voluntarily leave the country?
Well, look, if people are in this country who are not Brits and are not in work, then obviously they should leave. That's just common sense. And I want to free up those jobs so that the millions of British people who are languishing on benefits right now can get back into work. That is what reform is going to do. We are going to put British workers, British families, the British taxpayer first. And frankly, it's scandalous that previous governments haven't done that. And with Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, with me as Chancellor, the Treasury and the government is going to operate very, very differently. The interests of the British people are going to put first every single time. Thank you. I've got Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. Sorry if I misunderstood. Can I just clarify? Are you saying that companies that employ foreign workers will have to pay higher national insurance contributions than others?
Yes.
And also, will you do anything to encourage British workers to take up jobs? Because it's long been said that in many sectors there are jobs that they just don't want to do, either because it's not worth their while or they see it as beneath them. What would you do about that problem? Thank you.
Yeah, well, exactly. This is going to work in both directions. So what I'm announcing today is a big incentive for British businesses to do the right thing and to employ British workers, because there will be a serious tax advantage to a business doing just that. If you're going to employ a Brit, then you are going to pay less employers' national insurance, and you're going to avoid paying this very significant levy. And that will hit hardest at the lower end of the income spectrum, where we want to get those workers who, frankly, are not economic contributors to this country out of the country and ensure that Brits get those jobs. But you're right to say that we also need to do more to encourage Brits to apply and to take up those jobs. This is going to be accompanied by serious welfare reforms. Nigel and I have already set out some of those changes. We're not going to allow people to claim out-of-work benefits for disability, for example, if they have mild conditions like mild anxiety. They're going to have face-to-face appointments with a clinician. No more of these online appointments or people being able to claim benefits on the basis of a letter or an email. That's going to come to an end, and that will help to push those people back into the workplace. But it's completely morally and economically unacceptable today to have a situation where we have millions of Brits on welfare, and yet we've got millions of predominantly low-wage, low-skilled migrants in the country taking up those jobs. This policy, plus our migration policies that Zia's already set out, is going to change that, and it's going to change it very quickly. So we build a different economy, which is rebalanced in favour of British workers and the British taxpayer. I've got Lucy White from Bloomberg. Lucy.
Thank you, Mr. Jenrick. I wanted to ask about the expense of employing overseas workers. As you kind of alluded to, a lot of employers already have to pay the immigration skills surcharge. It is already more expensive to hire overseas workers. So is your position that it simply wasn't expensive enough for businesses to hire overseas workers? And also, you mentioned care homes as one of the areas where you would like to see employers pay their staff more and who have become too reliant on cheap overseas workers. A lot of care homes operate on very, very thin margins. So can you give an update on what reform is doing to change the social care sector, which is largely state-funded?
Well, firstly, the existing skills levy is a drop in the ocean. Only 1 in 8 foreign workers in the UK are subject to it. Very few people have even heard of it, and it has next to no impact. What we're proposing is much more significant than that. A total rebalancing of the tax system in favour of British workers, and we're unashamed of that. There are other countries in the world that have done this, like Singapore, Australia, Gulf countries. It is absolutely right that the tax system favours Brits over people who are not British citizens, and that employers have a very big incentive every time to hire a Brit over somebody who is not British. And why? Well, it's right, this is Britain. You should be hiring British workers. That is the right and patriotic thing to do. But it's also wrong that this scam has been able to exist for so long, where some employers benefit from cheap labour, but the taxpayer overall pays the bill, because it is the taxpayer paying for the benefits of the Brit who's out of work on welfare and for all the associated costs of people coming into the country. And these tiny policies that previous chancellors have done, like the skills levy, they don't even touch the sides of that. This is the radical change that we need to completely rebalance the economy. On social care, look, as I said earlier, 81% of those people working in the care sector are Brits. So most care providers are overwhelmingly employing British workers. And look, if they need to pay a Brit a little bit more, or if they need to improve the working conditions of those Brits, or improve the career progression and the skills training of those Brits to make that job more attractive, then they should be doing that, shouldn't they? That's right. It's a tough job working in care. It's hard, and those people do deserve to be paid and looked after better than they are at the moment. And it's not a sustainable solution to the problems of this country just to treat those people like dirt and bring in people from overseas to do their jobs instead. That is the model that successive governments have alighted on. It's wrong. It's wrong to the good Brits who are working in those jobs, and it needs to change. I've got now Adam Cherry from Guido. Adam.
What are the top 3 sectors you're actually targeting with this package? And as a general principle, are you concerned that the tax code, which is already 17,000 pages, is actually growing under reform rather than shrinking?
Well, no, we are going to simplify the tax code. We don't take any lessons from prior governments who've done that. I mean, I think to George Osborne, who created the Office of Tax Simplification and then added 5,000 pages to the tax code. That's not the way we're going to behave. This is a very simple and easy to understand levy. It's going to send a very clear message. In fact, I hope that it does so from today on, that if there's a reform government and you are one of those businesses that is heavily reliant on foreign labour, you need to change your ways. Let me give you an example, Adam. I went to a business in North Nottinghamshire on Friday, almost 2,000 employees, in an area with high unemployment. 55% of their workers are not British. That means that they are employing people from overseas to come in to work in that business because it's cheaper and easier than paying Brits properly, training up Brits, making that job sufficiently attractive for Brits to want to do that. And the taxpayer, as a result, is paying for thousands of people in that area to be on benefits, with all the social problems that go along with that. Hundreds of households where kids are growing up, where their parents don't work. Towns feeling left behind. That cannot be the right way for our country to proceed. I want to change that. This will finally make the change that we need. And I think it is one that millions and millions of working Brits will get behind. That for the first time in my lifetime, a Prime Minister and a Chancellor will say, we are going to put British workers first. And the good businesses out there who choose to hire a local Brit will be rewarded for doing that. Frankly, that should have happened a very long time ago. I've got Izzy Addison from PA. Izzy.
Thank you. Hi, Izzy Addison from Press Association. So can I ask about your reaction to the decision to ban social media for under 16s today?
Look, I'm a parent myself of young girls. So like every parent, I've spent a lot of time talking to my kids, to my wife, to our friends and family about screen time, about what our kids are watching. I'm as concerned as anybody else about harmful content that they might see. So I understand where this came from, that it is well-intentioned, but Nigel and I are very sceptical about this. We think it is very impractical, that is highly unlikely to succeed, and deliver the outcomes that it aims to do. You only have to look at the uptake of VPNs by people across the country immediately after the Online Safety Act came into force. Nigel said previously that we should look at the experience in Australia before making a judgment. And as far as I can see, the evidence from Australia is very mixed. A majority of the young people in Australia who are subject to the ban there are still on social media. They're still using it because they're smart. They found a way around this. So it doesn't feel to us like this is the right way to proceed. We're also very worried that this will be a backdoor route into mandatory ID, where everyone, frankly, regardless of their age, is going to have to start to put in their ID, a massive erosion of privacy online for the first time. And as Nigel said this morning, there are better ways to approach this. We are much more interested in whether you could use technology like the handsets that are available to young people as the route, so they don't have access to some of the harmful content, without going down this road, which I'm afraid is very likely to fail and have a lot of unintended consequences. I've got Noah Keat from Politico.
Hello there, good morning.
Good morning, Noah.
Labour MP Lauren Edwards has said that she'll bring back the assisted dying bill, which fell in the House of Lords earlier this year. I wonder what your reaction was to that. And just quickly, the Deputy Reform UK leader on Medway Council called Robbie Lammas, he's left the party, he's left Reform, saying that his defection from the Conservatives was the biggest mistake of my life, and said that there was disorganisation, infighting and incompetence on every level within the party. I wonder what your reaction was to that as well.
Well, look, I don't know this person, but as I understand it, he applied for a job at Reform and was rejected, and so I think that may explain his decision to leave the party. With respect to the online assisted dying bill, look, everyone will have their own view on this. I was firmly against it and voted against it at every turn. I thought it was a bad piece of legislation, poorly drafted, and that would have very severe unintended consequences, particularly for vulnerable people across the country. But as I say, ultimately it'd be up for members of Parliament to make their own individual judgments when it comes back before the House of Commons. We have, finally, Peter Walker from The Guardian. Peter.
Hello. When you're talking about the non-British workers who you want to target with this, you're kind of implicitly talking about them as they're people on work visas who haven't really got a stake in the country. But on the assumption, I think you said this applies to EU settled status people too. These are people who, in quite a few cases, will have lived here for 10, 20 years. They might have a British spouse, British kids. They might be church wardens, scout leaders. This is their home. This is where they live. And they're suddenly going to find that it's much, much more difficult for them to potentially get a place to live and certainly to get a job. Is your message to any non-British national in the UK, get a British passport as fast as you can, or basically you're not welcome? And if I may, just very, very quickly, it's a Makerfield-related one. Ant Middleton, the reality TV star, was at campaigning with your candidate last week. Robert Kenyon very happily posed for a photo with him. Can I just read a couple of things that Ant Middleton has said? I mean, he's praised rioting in Southampton. When rioting was breaking out in Burnley, he said, "Do your thing." He said, "You can't be a Muslim and be in charge of a Christian nation." And he said, first, second and third generation immigrants should not hold top-level government jobs. Nigel Farage has always had a very clear firewall between the parties he's led and the far right. With the rise of Restore UK, is that firewall now gone?
With respect to that, look, I don't know the exact allegations that you're making against him. There are thousands of people who come to support us in Makefield, and I'm not responsible for everyone who does. But obviously, Reform is very clear in its own positions on these things. On your first point, look, we are unashamedly on the side of British people. I am aspiring to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, and we are going to design a tax system that backs British workers and puts their interests first every single time. And why on earth did that not happen before? Why is that a controversial thing to say? I mean, I remember in 2008, was it Gordon Brown said British jobs for British workers? And he was attacked for saying it back then. Well, Reform is actually going to do it this time. We are going to make sure that the tax system rewards people who are Brits. And British companies take on British workers. And, you know, if you are in this country and you're not a British citizen, and, you know, you are somebody who will not be able to stay in the UK under a Reform government, then yeah, you should think of leaving the country. Because we want a country where people are here for the right reasons, who are economic contributors, and an economy that works for British citizens. Sorry, one last question. Hi, good morning.
Thank you. Aggie Chambray at LBC. Andy Haldane this morning told us on LBC that the triple lock needs to go. He said there's no other state benefit that rises above inflation. We should index it, he said, like all other state benefits. If you, Reform UK, want to be taken seriously by the markets, by economists, is there not a case for the triple lock to go?
No, look, we discussed this in some detail, as you know, earlier in the year, and we came to the conclusion that a Reform government would retain the triple lock. I'm convinced that was the right decision. Just as today we are backing British workers, it is right that the British government ensures that those people who have worked their whole lives, have paid into the system and contributed, have dignity and security in the last decades of their life. And if you're asking me, how will we ensure that the markets have confidence in a Reform government, that we will balance the books and look after people's money? It's not going to be by doing it on the backs of pensioners. It's going to be by cutting the benefits bill and getting those people who are choosing not to work back into the workplace. If we just brought that down to where it was before the pandemic, that would save £58 billion a year. We're going to get rid of crazy net zero subsidies that Ed Miliband is pursuing. We're going to stop paying foreign aid to rich countries around the world. We're not going to give benefits to people who aren't British citizens. Reform is going to find tens and tens of billions in waste that we will cut out. And that is how we will reduce the size of the state, we will be able to satisfy the markets and bring down the cost of borrowing, which you're right is absolutely crazy right now, because the Labour Party is not able to do any of those things. But we're not going, as the first port of call, to Brits who did work their whole lives and deserve a degree of comfort in the last years of their life. Very good. Thank you all very much indeed, and have a good day. Thank you. Sorry, we're finished now. Thanks very much, everybody. Nice to see you all.